Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. Welcome to the African Language Conversations. Today, I have another exciting episode. Very interesting comment made by a reader in reaction to Muthoni Thangwa's children should be taught in mother tongue at school. So the reader made this comment. They say this topic, that's the topic of mother tongue as language of instruction, that this topic is a non-issue. If you want your kids to learn your language, teach them at home. I grew up in Nairobi and learned my Gikuyu from parents and extended family. This thing of promoting kids to sit in a tribal class is the stuff of retrogressive rural mindsets. So very generalizing statement, very condescending, thinking about rural people in not in a very positive way. But let me start by talking about language of instruction. In Africa and in Kenya, even if, let me just maybe stay with Kenya, but what I'm saying I think is true for Africa. Language of instruction is not a non-issue. Language of instruction is everything. The problems that schools in Kenya have, the products that schools produce, the problems that schools or many schools in Kenya face, the problems that many students in Kenya face, most of them are related to language, language of instruction. It's just that Kenyans have buried their heads in the sand and they don't want to look at it. They don't want to think about the issue of language of instruction. Language of instruction is everything. So don't dismiss it and say it's a non-issue. It is very important, and it's high time Kenyans stopped and started thinking seriously about language of instruction. So the reader uses, the reader who made these comments uses their experience to generalize. It's good to generalize, but sometimes be cognizant of the fact that generalizations in many cases miss out. They are not true, like in many contexts. Yeah. So the reader says they learned their mother tongue from parents and the extended family. So because they lived in Nairobi, I assume that their mother tongue, Gikuyu, is not their first language. They probably learned other language. They probably learned English and Kiswahili first, but they just learned later on their language. So it's good for them. It's good that they were able to learn their mother tongue from their parents and their extended family. But do not assume, it's wrong for them, it's wrong for that reader to assume that everyone in Kenya experienced or experiences life in a similar way. People's conditions are very different. People's experiences are very different. They live in totally different conditions. It's possible that people who have grown up or who experience life in the same way that the reader did, but it's not everyone. And do not assume that everyone lives in Nairobi. And more importantly, they should not assume that everyone starts school not speaking a mother tongue. They should not assume that. The reader shouldn't assume that. Not everyone lives in Nairobi. Not everyone goes to school maybe speaking English or Swahili and learning their mother tongue later. No, that's a very wrong assumptions to make. The mother tongue as language of instruction, which Muthoni Thangwa presented in that article, that policy is not just for Nairobi. It's not targeted at the people living in Nairobi or people living in cities. It's targeted at everyone in Kenya. So make these comments knowing that there are people in Kenya for whom mother tongue is important. And it's also very important not to look down upon people living in rural areas. Kids in rural areas deserve a good quality education, just like everyone. Just like people living in the cities, they deserve a good quality education in a language that they understand. So the reader's experience, as I said, is not same as other people's experience. They grew up in the city, and they probably picked up Kiswahili as their first language. They probably learned Kiswahili or English as their first language. And in school, when they started school, it wasn't a problem for them because in schools they were taught in Kiswahili or in English. So they were already familiar with this language. They already understood these languages. And the reader, I'm sure, was not forced to learn in a language that they didn't understand. And nobody, the policy that this reader is reacting to is not telling people living in Nairobi. It's not telling Gikuyu people who are living in Nairobi and speak English or Kiswahili. It's not telling them. It's not forcing them to learn Gikuyu in Nairobi. It's not forcing them to learn in Gikuyu in Nairobi or in cities or in towns generally. Areas that are multilingual, the policy is very, very clear about those areas. In those areas, there is Kiswahili. There's Kiswahili, which is the language that most people or most kids speak in those areas. So there's Kiswahili for that. Nobody is saying that kids in Nairobi should learn in the 40 different languages. No, that's not what the policy says. The policy says in cities, in mixed areas, use Kiswahili because that's the main language in those areas. There are areas that are also maybe fine with English. So where in those areas, maybe English can be considered. English can be used. In the villages, on the other hand, there are kids who speak only one language when they start school. So this reader apparently doesn't want these kids to learn in those languages. They don't want them to learn in the language that they understand. They don't want them to learn to read and understand those languages. I think that's wrong. And the reader says this thing of promoting kids to sit in a tribal class is the stuff of retrogressive mindsets. So I don't understand. Does this reader mean that all rural people or people who live in rural areas have retrogressive mindsets? I think that's condescending. Don't look down upon people who live in rural areas. And then the reader also erroneously assumes that kids in Nairobi, I've already said this, they erroneously assumes that kids in Nairobi and cities and other mixed areas are required to learn in the language of their mother tongue. No, the policy doesn't say that. The policy says the kids should be taught in the language that they understand, the language that they're comfortable with. So in areas like Nairobi, most kids are comfortable with Kiswahili. They speak Kiswahili at the playground. That should be the language of instruction in such areas. Not to say like, yeah, your parents are Gikuyu, so we are pulling you out from this class and forcing you to learn in Gikuyu. Or your parents are Luo, so we are forcing you to learn in Luo. Your parents are Luya, we are forcing you to learn in Luya. In Nairobi and mixed areas, in other cities, in other towns, Kiswahili is the language, or should be the language of instruction. And the reader assumes also erroneously that people who speak English or those who speak a non-tribal language and are living in Nairobi or other cities are not tribal. That's not true. There are a lot of people who speak English or Kiswahili and live in Nairobi who are very tribal. Look at how people generally in Kenya vote. You want to tell me that people who live in Nairobi and speak Kiswahili, they don't vote along tribal lines? They do. They do. So speaking English or living in Nairobi is not a sufficient condition for being non-tribal. You can live in Nairobi and be tribal. You can speak English and be tribal. You can speak Kiswahili and be tribal. So, and you can live in the village and not be tribal or be less tribalistic. So don't make the wrong assumption that just speaking English or just speaking Kiswahili and just living in Nairobi takes away your tribalist tendencies. You can be still tribalistic when you speak English. Speaking English is not a sufficient condition. Speaking Kiswahili is not a sufficient condition for not being tribal. So yeah. So please, if you are listening to me and you have or hold similar ideas or similar sentiments, yeah, please think more. Think more. First, language of instruction. Language of instruction in Kenya is, and in other African countries is everything. Don't dismiss it. Don't say or don't think even 1 minute that that language of instruction is not important. It's everything. You learn in a language that you understand. If you are forced to learn in a language that you don't understand, you are never going to go anywhere. You're not going to make you're not going to make any good progress. You're going to probably dislike school. You're probably going to feel the need to drop out. So language of instruction is the same. And also, do not assume that everyone lives in Nairobi. Do not assume also that everyone in Nairobi is going to be forced to learn in the language that their mothers or parents speak. No, that's not the policy. The policy is about using a language that kids are comfortable with, a language that they use, a language that they understand, to learn. Give those kids a chance. Let them learn. As they're learning, I'm not saying that English is not important. I'm not saying that that they shouldn't learn English. They should also learn English. But English in some places, or in many places actually in Kenya, rural areas mostly, English is not the appropriate language of instruction. The mother tongue is important. The mother tongue is the best choice, and kids should be given that opportunity to learn in that language, to learn in the language that they understand. So I'll stop here for now. Please comment. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and please share. And if you liked what I said, please give it a like. And I hope I'll see you next time. Let's keep conversations about African languages going. Yeah, have a great time. Bye-bye.